Absalom's story begins in one of the most famous periods in the Bible, when David, king of Israel, was already a renowned man, beloved by the people and known for his courage and faith. Absalom was one of David's sons, and from a young age he attracted attention, not only for being heir to the throne, but also for his appearance and striking presence. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, okay? This way, powerful stories like Absalom's will reach more people. And you'll also help me a lot. Are you subscribed? Then let's dive together into this surprising story full of lessons you've never heard before. Absalom was described as a man of striking beauty. His hair was so long and thick that, according to the Bible, he cut it only once a year. And the weight of that cut alone was enormous, a clear sign of his strength and distinction. He was not only handsome on the outside, but also intelligent and charismatic, qualities that would make him an important figure in the kingdom. But even as the king's son, Absalom's life would not be simple. He lived in a family full of challenges, internal struggles, and difficult decisions. What was about to happen in his life would change everything, for him, for his family, and for the entire kingdom of Israel. Absalom, the young prince, had dreams and desires that at first seemed normal for a king's son. But his path would become one marked by difficult choices, intense conflicts, and a story that to this day makes us reflect on love, justice, and consequences. Absalom wasn't just any prince. He was known for his extraordinary beauty, something that drew the attention of everyone around him. The Bible tells us that he had a face as beautiful as an angel's, and his long hair, which he cut once a year, was so heavy that it weighed about 200 grams, a visible sign of his strength and status. Imagine a man so imposing and distinguished that upon entering a room, all eyes were drawn to him. This outward beauty was accompanied by a natural charm, a grace that made people like him, feel confident, and even a certain magnetism. But behind this charming appearance lay a young man full of ambition and desire, someone who wanted to be recognized, loved, and respected. Absalom didn't simply want to be another son of the king. He wanted to be seen as a leader, as someone who could change the destiny of Israel. This combination of physical beauty and personal charisma made him popular among the people. He had the ability to reach out to people, listen to their problems, and appear fair and understanding, qualities that would make him a threat to his own father, David. It's important to understand that at the time, appearance and demeanor carried enormous weight for those aspiring to power. Absalom knew this and used these qualities to win a place in the hearts of the people. But this beauty and charm, so highly valued, would also be the source of many tragedies, because what lies beneath the surface is not always visible. Pride, revenge, and the desire for power would shape his destiny in painful ways. Absalom was undoubtedly a young man who drew attention wherever he went. The Bible describes his beauty in a way that makes us imagine someone who seemed almost perfect to human eyes, not only in his physical appearance, but also in the aura of confidence and magnetism he exuded. He was tall, strong, and handsome, and his hair, which he cut only once a year, was so heavy that it symbolized not only his physical strength, but also his dignity and royal status. In an era when appearance mattered greatly for leadership and gaining the respect of the people, Absalom stood out impressively. But this outward beauty was only part of Absalom's complex personality. Behind that charming face was an ambitious young man with a fierce desire to be recognized and to assert himself not only as a prince, but as a worthy leader of the kingdom. He didn't want to simply be another of King David's sons. He wanted to be loved by the people. He wanted his voice to be heard, his name to be remembered, his power to be real. This quest for recognition led him to develop a very strong, charismatic side. Absalom knew how to listen. He had a natural ability to reach out to people, understand their pain, and make them feel he cared. He walked the streets of Jerusalem and the villages, And when someone knocked on the palace door, Absalom was there, ready to listen and help. Little by little, he began to build a reputation as a just man, someone who could be a true defender of the people. But this popularity began to create a dangerous climate within the royal family itself. The figure of his father, King David, though loved and respected, seemed to be losing ground to his son's charisma. Many began to look to Absalom as an alternative, a hope for a different future. And for Absalom, this was fuel, the feeling that the people admired him and the possibility of one day ruling his own kingdom. However, not everything was so simple. Behind this outward shine, Absalom hid deep feelings of pride, pain, and even resentment. He carried resentment from what was happening at home, especially the injustices he and his family had suffered. And over time, this mixture of beauty, charm, and repressed feelings would eventually lead to a path filled with conflict, betrayal, and tragedy. Absalom's story shows us that beauty and charisma alone do not guarantee inner peace or happiness. They can open doors and win over crowds, but when used to fuel ego and limitless ambition, they can lead to downfall. It's a powerful reminder for all of us. True strength lies in the balance between heart and appearance, between the desire to be loved and the humility to accept life's circumstances. Thus, Absalom, the handsome and charismatic young prince, begins to write his own story, one marked by ups and downs, moments of glory, and episodes of profound pain. And this beauty that enchants the eye gradually reveals the cracks in a restless heart. In the history of David's family, not all was glitter and glory. Behind the king's power and the beauty of his sons lay deep conflicts, wounds that forever marked the fate of that house. One such defining moment involves Tamar, Absalom's sister, a young woman who experienced a terrible ordeal that would shake the entire family and trigger devastating consequences. Tamar was David's daughter, like Absalom, and was a delicate young woman respected for her purity and innocence. She trusted her family, believing in the love and justice that should exist within her own home. But this trust was cruelly shattered. Amnon, her half-brother, also David's son but by another wife, was consumed by a wrong desire, a dark feeling that led him to betray family ties and commit an act of immense violence against Tamar. The Bible tells us that Amnon was obsessed with Tamar, and even though he knew what he felt was wrong, he couldn't control his desires. Driven by this feeling, he devised a plan. He feigned illness and asked Tamar to come to him to prepare food, an excuse to have her all to himself. Tamar, obedient and naive, didn't suspect Amnon's intentions and complied with her half-brother's request. When Tamar entered the room, Amnon forced her against her will, committing a brutal rape. What should have been a place of safety became the scene of a tragedy that broke Tamar's heart and forever stained the history of the royal family. She emerged from that experience marked by pain, fear, and shame, feelings that can still be difficult to comprehend in their full depth. The impact of this act on David's family was enormous. Tamar not only suffered deeply, but also felt helpless in the face of her father's and other household members' reactions. King David, upon learning of what had happened, was outraged, but strangely, he did not act with the force the situation demanded. He failed to punish Amnon as he should have, and this caused a painful silence, a kind of injustice that would leave scars that would be difficult to heal. Tamar's brother Absalom felt an uncontainable fury. He loved his sister and couldn't bear to see her suffering, much less Amnon's impunity. His wounded sister's pain became his own, and his father's silence an invitation to act on his own. From that moment on, a seed of revenge and rebellion was planted in Absalom's heart. The story of Tamar's rape is more than a tragic episode. It is a portrait of the deep wounds that can exist within a family, even in a seemingly powerful and blessed home. It is a painful reminder that evil can arise where least expected, and that human justice sometimes fails. but it's also the beginning of a journey that will change the life of Absalom, a young man who until then lived between beauty and power, but who now faces the challenge of dealing with injustice and pain in an intense and definitive way. This tragedy will be the turning point for him to make decisions that will forever shape the fate of the house of David and the entire kingdom. When David learned of what Amnon had done to Tamar, the king was deeply disturbed. The Bible says he was very angry, but despite his anger, he took no immediate action against Amnon. This reaction, or rather this lack of reaction, cast a heavy shadow over the entire royal family and opened a wound that would not heal so easily. To understand David's silence, it's important to remember that he was above all a man and a king in a delicate situation. Amnon was his eldest son, the rightful heir to the throne. Punishing Amnon severely could have signaled conflict within the family itself, an internal division that would have threatened the kingdom. David, a king facing both external and internal wars, may have feared losing the stability of his reign. But for Absalom, David's silence was like a slap in the face, a demonstration of weakness and injustice that he was unwilling to accept. Absalom felt his sister's pain as if it were his own, and saw in his father's silence a betrayal that left him angry and frustrated. He realized that at that moment he could no longer count on his father's justice to protect his rights and those of his family. Pain and anger began to grow within Absalom, fueled by silence and inaction. He held this resentment in his heart, pondering how he could act to restore his sister's honor and bring justice to his family. This feeling was not only personal, but also a call to fight against the injustice rampant within the king's own household. David's silence, then, was not a simple oversight. It was a factor that triggered a series of dramatic events. He left room for Absalom to become a central character in a conflict that would shake the entire kingdom of Israel. The young prince, once known for his beauty and charisma, now began to show a darker side, determined to correct the flaws he saw around him, no matter the cost. But it wasn't just anger or the search for justice. The king's silence also brought a sense of abandonment to Tamar and her entire family. The suffering sister needed support and protection, but her father's lack of a firm response left her scarred by pain and shame. Thus, David's silence, so weighty, was one of the most decisive moments in that story. He demonstrated how inaction in the face of evil can have profound and irreversible consequences, and how justice, when delayed, can turn into revenge. And it was precisely this tension, this unresolved pain, that set the stage for the next chapter in Absalom's life, a chapter marked by decisions that would forever change the destiny of King David, his family, and the people of Israel. After the horrific episode involving his sister Tamar and King David's incredible failure to punish Amnon, the situation within the family became unbearable. Absalom, carrying a burning mixture of grief, anger, and a desire for justice, felt he could no longer remain in Jerusalem. The atmosphere was tense, and the presence of Amnon, Tamar's attacker, made everything even more unbearable. In this context of suffering and internal conflict, Absalom decided to flee to the land of Geshur, which lay across the Euphrates River, a distant region, practically an exile. Geshur was ruled by his maternal grandfather Talmai, king of that region, and thus became an ideal refuge for Absalom. There, he could escape the harsh and hostile climate of Jerusalem and at the same time plan his next steps away from the watchful eye of David and his enemies. Imagine the young prince, filled with anger and sadness, leaving behind the capital, his friends, and the comforts of the palace to live in a foreign land, unknown and far from his family. This decision was undoubtedly one of the most painful of his life, but also a strategy to survive and plot a revenge he believed was just. Geshur, a land outside the territory of Israel, represented for him both exile and sanctuary. During the 3 years he spent in Geshur, Absalom lived in relative isolation, but he never forgot what had happened to Tamar, nor the injustice suffered by his family. He knew he couldn't simply wait for time to heal his wounds. He needed to act, and the distance gave him the opportunity to calmly plan how to position himself to regain his honor and place. This period of exile was crucial to Absalom's transformation from a wounded young prince into a determined leader. He wasn't just escaping, he was strengthening himself, maturing, and laying the groundwork for what would come next. This time away from court allowed him to develop strategies and cultivate alliances that would be crucial to his future rebellion against his father. For the people and David's court, Absalom's absence was felt as an unsettling silence. Meanwhile, in the land of Geshur, Absalom gained time to reflect and grow, but also to nourish the desire for justice that wouldn't leave him alone. This phase was crucial to understanding the complexity of the character, who blended pain, pride, and the ambition to change the destiny that seemed written for him. Absalom's exile in Geshur also reminds us how, often in biblical stories, moments of separation and hardship are essential for strengthening and preparing for great events. The young prince's journey, marked by suffering and isolation, was far from over. It was just beginning to unfold. After spending 3 long years in exile, far from his father's court and the palace where he had grown up, Absalom was finally given permission to return to Jerusalem. His return was neither simple nor immediate. There were many tensions in the air, mixed feelings, and a series of challenges the young prince would face to regain his place in the family and the kingdom. When Absalom arrived in the city, he returned not as a mere lost son, but as someone carrying a heavy burden, the weight of the injustice suffered by his sister Tamar, the pain of Amnon's lack of punishment, and the anger that had been growing silently in his heart. Even with permission to return, he still could not approach David directly. The king, for his part, was still torn between his love for his son and the political and family complexities that his return entailed. Imagine the scene. Absalom, upon stepping foot back in the Jerusalem he had known since childhood, felt the bitter taste of a home that didn't fully welcome him. He was there, physically present, but emotionally distant from his father and the court. His relationship with David was marked by distrust and open wounds, and even among the king's advisors and soldiers, many viewed him with reservation. During this period, Absalom began to move strategically, seeking to strengthen his influence and re-establish his political position. He continued to use his charm and beauty to win over the people, becoming a man who, although wounded, was also wise and calculating. This phase of his return was crucial because even without direct access to the king, Absalom showed clear signs that he was unwilling to remain in the shadows. However, the estrangement between father and son was still evident. Absalom lived in a kind of emotional limbo, close enough to see the family's power and glory, but distant enough to feel the bitterness of rejection. He needed to find a way to reconnect, while simultaneously paving his way for a future that could mean a direct confrontation with David. On the other hand, David couldn't forget the reasons Absalom had left. The shadow of the tragedy involving Tamar and Amnon still loomed over them, and the king felt the weight of responsibility and sadness. Even though he desired peace, he was forced to deal with the tensions between his sons and the consequences of the family turmoil. Absalom's arrival in Jerusalem marked the beginning of a delicate game of power, trust, and resentment. No one in that court could have predicted the lengths to which this young prince would go to seek justice and recognition. His return marked a moment of apparent calm, but beneath the surface, powerful forces were stirring, paving the way for events that would forever change the history of the Kingdom of Israel. This phase of Absalom's life is a testament to how unhealed wounds and unresolved injustices can transform a person. Returning home, rather than bringing relief, intensified the internal battle he was waging. between the desire for forgiveness and the desire for revenge, between love for his father and revolt against him. Thus, with his return to Jerusalem, Absalom began a delicate chapter where each step would be crucial in determining his destiny and the future of his family. The man, known for his beauty and charisma, began to transform into a restless, determined leader, and above all, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. Absalom's return to Jerusalem was not a simple homecoming, but the beginning of a new phase in his life. One marked by ambition, political strategizing, and a clear intention to conquer what he believed was rightfully his, the throne of Israel. Absalom was no longer the wounded, silent young man. He now had a firm goal, and he would use all his abilities to achieve it. To understand Absalom's plan, it's important to understand the political and social context in which he found himself. David's reign, though consolidated, was not free from internal crises. There was dissatisfaction among various tribes, political tensions, and a people who often felt their leaders didn't listen to them or adequately protect them. Absalom, with his youth, beauty, and charisma, knew how to exploit these weaknesses to build a solid base of support. Absalom's first step was to win the trust and hearts of the people. He didn't use brute force or violence. Instead, he adopted the posture of a fair and approachable leader. Absalom established a sort of shadow office. He positioned himself at the city gates, a place where people often sought justice and assistance. There he presented himself as someone willing to listen to the citizens' problems, defend the oppressed, and offer solutions that he believed were not being provided by King David's government. This strategy was brilliant and highly effective. Absalom offered what the people were missing: attention, understanding, and a justice that seemed out of reach under his father's reign. He won over those who felt forgotten, marginalized, or wronged, becoming a symbol of hope and change. Gradually, his influence grew, and the population began to see him as a true leader, a viable alternative to royal authority. But Absalom didn't stop there. He used his beauty and charisma to construct an image of the ideal leader, someone who was simultaneously strong, compassionate, and just. He knew that appearance and charm were powerful weapons in a time when leadership also depended on winning people's hearts. This combination of personal charisma and political strategies created an almost irresistible effect. Furthermore, Absalom began forming alliances with local leaders, tribal chieftains, and influential political figures who could strengthen his movement. He knew he couldn't simply overthrow David alone. He needed support, both popular and political and military. This process of alliance building was careful and strategic, demonstrating that Absalom was an intelligent and determined young man. Meanwhile, King David was beginning to realize the threat his own son posed. The rebellion Absalom was preparing was not just a family crisis, but a direct challenge to his reign and the stability of the kingdom. David felt torn between fatherly love and the need to protect his throne, a situation that made the conflict even more painful and complex. Absalom's plan to seize the throne was not a quick or impulsive coup. It was a calculated action involving winning hearts, forming alliances, and weakening his father's authority. Through the loss of popular support, he presented himself not as a violent usurper, but as a defender of justice, someone who could restore order and bring prosperity to the people. This ability to manipulate people's emotions, desires, and needs revealed a side of Absalom that many were unaware of, the side of the political strategist, the charismatic leader, and the man willing to do anything to achieve his goals. Thus, the young prince who was once exiled and forgotten in the land of Geshur was now building a true conspiracy with firm steps and a clear vision to take his father's throne and rule Israel. As Absalom gained increasing popular support, he began to play a role that would cement his influence and directly threaten the authority of his father, King David. He began appearing at the city gates, a traditional place where people sought justice, advice, and solutions to their problems. It was a meeting place between the people and their leaders, a symbolic space of power and decision-making. Absalom used this opportunity to present himself as someone who listened to the people, understood their pain and injustices, and was willing to act to help those who found no support in official institutions. With his charm and intelligence, he won over those who sought him out, demonstrating a side of a leader who was approachable, fair, and concerned with the real needs of the population. He told everyone that if he had power, he would not let anyone suffer or be wronged, and little by little, he created an image of an ideal prince, just, strong, and concerned for the well-being of his people. Many people began to prefer to go to Absalom with their problems, rather than resorting to the king's official authorities. This simple act of standing with the people caused his popularity to grow impressively. However, while Absalom gained the people's favor, tensions in the palace grew daily. David's advisors watched with concern as the young prince's influence grew, seeing him as a real threat to the throne. Many were torn between loyalty to the king and admiration for Absalom's charisma. It was a delicate moment as the unity of the court began to unravel and the fragility of David's reign became increasingly evident. Absalom, in turn, used this division to his advantage. He knew that to overthrow his father, it wasn't enough to simply gain the support of the common people. He also needed to win over the powerful and influential who could help him consolidate his rule. Therefore, he intensified his alliances, maintaining contact with local leaders, tribal chiefs, and military officers who, dissatisfied with David, saw in Absalom a new hope. This period was marked by intense political maneuvering where Absalom demonstrated his skill in managing diverse groups, balancing popular charisma with political strategy. He knew the throne would not be won by brute force, but rather by the hearts and minds of the people. Each meeting at the city gates was another step toward his ascension. Absalom's stance as judge of the people also revealed his talent for manipulating the emotions and expectations of those around him. He listened to their complaints, offered words of comfort, and promised change, creating an emotional bond with those who felt abandoned by David's rule. But this growing popularity also generated fear and distrust. Deep inside, King David's heart sank as he watched his beloved son become an ever-increasing threat. David felt the pain of betrayal, even though he knew Absalom was acting out of resentment and a desire for justice, and he wondered how this family story would end. Meanwhile, the people began to divide, some loyal to the king, others seduced by the promises and idealized figure of Absalom. This division showed that the stability of the kingdom was at risk, and that the conflict was not just between father and son, but between differing visions of Israel's future. The story of this moment teaches us about the power of communication, empathy, and charismatic leadership, but also about the dangers when these gifts are used for personal gain and to divide rather than unite. Thus, with each popular rally, Absalom not only consolidated his power, but also set the stage for the inevitable confrontation that would forever change the history of the people of Israel and the family of King David. After years of quiet tension and political maneuvering, the conflict between Absalom and his father, King David, finally erupted into open rebellion that would shake the foundations of the kingdom of Israel. Absalom, once the charming and beloved prince, now clearly positioned himself as his own father's rival, willing to fight for what he believed was his right, the throne. But what drove Absalom to take this decisive step? The answer is rooted in years of pain, resentment, and injustice. The open wound from the violence against Tamar, the lack of justice, David's silence, and the way Absalom was treated. Upon his return from exile, all of this combined to fuel a burning desire to reclaim his place and honor. For Absalom, the rebellion was not just a struggle for power, but a response to the betrayal and abandonment he felt within his own family. By declaring himself king in Hebron, a historic city where his grandfather had reigned, Absalom not only challenged David's authority, but also evoked a powerful symbolic connection to the roots of the Israelite monarchy. This strategic choice demonstrated his clear intention to present himself as a legitimate alternative rooted in the people's traditions. News of the rebellion spread quickly, and the kingdom began to fracture. Many soldiers, tribal chiefs, and ordinary citizens were won over to Absalom's cause, drawn by his promise of justice and change. Others remained faithful to David, loyal to the king who had guided them for so long. This internal division threatened the unity of the people and foreshadowed a bloody conflict. David, faced with his own son's betrayal, faced one of the greatest pains of his life. It wasn't just a political issue, it was a deep wound in the heart of a father who loved his son, even in the face of rebellion. Rather than respond with immediate violence, David chose to flee Jerusalem to avoid unnecessary bloodshed in the holy city. This decision demonstrated the greatness of his spirit, but also the gravity of the situation. David's escape was accompanied by a mixture of sadness and apprehension. He knew the battle would be fierce, and that confronting his son could destroy everything he had built. As he headed into temporary exile, David left behind not only his throne, but also his home and the hope of peace. Meanwhile, Absalom entered Jerusalem as a true king, capturing the palace and attracting the support of many who saw him as a savior. But victory was still uncertain, as the war had only just begun. Absalom's rebellion is a tragic chapter that reminds us how pride, resentment, and a lack of communication can destroy families and nations. It's a story of love and hate, power and pain, that shows the fragility of human relationships, even amid great feats and achievements. The kingdom of Israel was on the brink of collapse, divided between two men who shared blood but were separated by deep wounds. The ensuing battle would not only be for the throne, but for the soul of a people and the redemption of a family. When Absalom declared himself king in Hebron and his rebellion gained momentum, David faced the hardest decision of his life: to abandon Jerusalem, the holy city he had so zealously ruled, and flee for his life and to avoid the bloodshed of his beloved people. This flight was not an act of cowardice, but of wisdom and love for his people, a sacrifice to avoid a bloody civil war within the city walls. The night David left the palace was filled with silence and tears. He was not only abandoning a throne, but also a dream, a story built over years of battles, conquests, and many tears. The king knew that the loss of Jerusalem to his own son was not just political, it was a deep wound in a father's heart. As he walked, surrounded by his faithful followers, David felt the crushing pain of family betrayal. Every step away from the city was a step away from the family he loved, but who had now rejected him. The pain of seeing a son rebel against him was immense, and the silence among the men reflected the weight of the situation. David had to juggle his role as king and his role as father. He deeply desired Absalom's return, for peace to be restored, but he also needed to prepare for the worst, a confrontation that could cost them both their lives. This tension tore at his soul, revealing the complexity of leading a people and keeping a family together. Furthermore, David faced fear for the future of the kingdom. Internal division weakened Israel, making it vulnerable to external enemies and internal chaos. The flight was a moment of vulnerability, but also of reflection and intense prayer, seeking strength and wisdom for the challenges that lay ahead. During this period, David and his men found refuge in distant regions, far from the capital, but still maintaining the hope of retaking Jerusalem and bringing peace to the kingdom. The strategy of temporarily retreating allowed David to gather forces, organize his soldiers, and plan how to confront the rebellion with the least possible suffering for his people. In David's heart, faith was his greatest strength. Even in the face of profound pain, he sought comfort and guidance from the Lord, writing psalms that expressed his anguish, confidence, and hope. These moments of prayer reveal the human side of the king, a strong yet vulnerable man guided by faith in God. David's escape also made it clear that political power alone is not enough to guarantee stability. Love, justice, and unity are essential to the health of a nation. And when these pillars are shaken, even the most powerful king faces moments of fragility. News of Absalom's rebellion spread quickly throughout the kingdom, creating a climate of uncertainty and fear among the people of Israel. Many hearts were divided, and the stability David had worked so hard to build seemed irreversibly threatened. The court, the tribes, and the cities began to choose sides, and what had been a family crisis turned into a war that would shake the nation to its very foundations. For the Israelites, this struggle was not just about who would be king, but about what path the country would take. Some supported David, the king who had unified the tribes and guided Israel with justice and faith. Others saw Absalom as a young, charismatic leader who promised change and a more just government for those who felt forgotten. This division was not only political, but also emotional, as both were sons of the same king, and the royal family was disintegrating before everyone's eyes. Meanwhile, David gathered his faithful followers and prepared his forces for the inevitable confrontation. The war would not only be of swords, but also of hearts, ideals, and hopes. For David, this battle was more than a dispute for the throne. It was a fight for the survival of his legacy and the restoration of peace in Israel. Absalom, for his part, did not hesitate to advance. He organized a strong and well-prepared army, composed of those who believed in his cause and desired a new era for the kingdom. He entered Jerusalem, seizing the palace and establishing himself as king, but he knew his father was still alive and coming after him with his soldiers. The tension grew with each passing day. The ensuing war was marked by fierce and strategic battles. Absalom proved to be an intelligent military leader, commanding his men with determination. David, despite his deep sadness over his son's betrayal, demonstrated wisdom and courage, seeking to minimize the suffering of his people and the destruction of the land. Between battles, there were moments of anguish and prayer. David asked God for protection for his people and mercy for his rebellious son. The king's sadness was palpable. He did not wish Absalom's death, but he knew that war could bring that outcome. The divided people suffered from uncertainty. Families were torn apart, friends became enemies, and fear of an uncertain future hung over the entire land. This war was not just a struggle for power, but a profound crisis that shook Israel's values and faith. Despite the conflict, there was hope. David trusted that even amidst the pain, God would lead the kingdom to the victory of justice and peace. This trust kept the king steadfast, even when the pain of betrayal seemed unbearable. The tension that had been building for months finally culminated in a battle that would determine the fate of the kingdom of Israel and the royal family. David and Absalom now faced each other, not only as king and rebel, but as father and son in a conflict that carried immense pain and an almost unbearable weight for both. The battle took place in a region called the Forests of Ephraim, a difficult and treacherous terrain filled with dense trees and mountains. The location favored those familiar with the terrain, but also hampered the movement of larger troops, making every step and every decision crucial to the outcome of the battle. David trusted his commanders, especially Joab, his nephew and experienced military leader, to lead the troops wisely and avoid unnecessary losses. Although David was in supreme command, he wanted the conflict to be resolved as bloodlessly as possible, always with his rebellious son on the other side in mind. During the battle, Absalom fought with courage and skill, demonstrating the strength and charisma that had made him so beloved among the people. He used his beauty and agility to stand out among the warriors, but fate was about to take a cruel turn. At a critical moment in the battle, while trying to escape Joab's troops, Absalom became trapped in a tree. His long hair, a symbol of his strength and pride, became entangled in the branches. There, vulnerable and hanging, he was at the mercy of the enemy soldiers. When Joab learned of the situation, he did not hesitate. Despite David's implicit order to spare his son's life, Joab decided to act quickly and cut off Absalom's life with 3 darts, tragically ending the young prince's life. The news of Absalom's death reached David while he was still on the battlefield, and the grief he felt was indescribable. He wept bitterly, with tears that reflected a mixture of deep sadness, regret, and the grief of a father who loses his son even in the face of betrayal. David spoke words that have gone down in history, lamenting the loss of the son who, despite his rebellion, was still loved. "My son Absalom, my son Absalom, would that I had died in your place. Absalom, my son, my son." This scene is one of the most moving and human in the Bible, showing that even kings, leaders are human, subject to the pains and tragedies of family life. Absalom's death brought a heavy silence to the battlefield and a moment of reflection for the entire kingdom. The war was over, but the price paid was too high. David returned to Jerusalem not as a victorious king, but as a grieving father, carrying the pain of loss and the weight of difficult decisions. This final chapter of Absalom's rebellion teaches us about the tragic consequences of pride, revenge, and human failings, but also about the deep and unconditional love a father can feel, even in the face of conflict. Absalom's story is one of beauty and fall, of love and pain, that resonates to this day as a warning to families and leaders about the dangers of division and unforgiveness. After Absalom's tragic death, David plunged into deep mourning. His father's pain was immense and visible to all. He wept bitterly, mourning the loss of a son who, despite his rebellion, remained his flesh and blood. This moment revealed David's humanity, demonstrating that even the greatest leaders are vulnerable to life's pains. The kingdom of Israel, in turn, went through a period of instability and sadness. The rebellion shook the political and social structures, leaving the people divided and fragile. However, over time, David's leadership managed to restore order and unite the tribes under his authority. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences that family and political conflicts can have, and the importance of forgiveness and reconciliation for true peace. After deeply mourning the loss of Absalom, David returned to Jerusalem with a heavy heart, but determined to restore unity to the kingdom. He knew his mission was not just to rule, but to heal the wounds left by the rebellion and bring peace to the people. David wisely resumed his rule, seeking to strengthen alliances between the tribes and calm tensions. Inflamed by civil war, the king valued justice and mercy, demonstrating that even in the face of betrayal, it was possible to act with compassion and firm leadership. During this period, David also dedicated himself to strengthening the faith of his people, reminding them of the importance of unity under God and obedience to his laws. His legacy was cemented not only as a great warrior and ruler, but also as a man of faith, capable of facing the greatest pain and maintaining hope. The story of Absalom's rebellion and the recovery of the kingdom under David teaches us that even in the greatest crises, redemption and reconstruction are possible, and that true leadership lies in the ability to love, forgive, and unite. Absalom's story is a powerful lesson about love, pride, justice, and the consequences of human choices. It shows how pain and lack of forgiveness can destroy families and nations, and how the desire for revenge can lead to tragedy. But above all, this narrative reveals the depth of a father's love who, even wounded and betrayed, grieves over the loss of his son. David's reign, marked by victories and defeats, reminds us that true strength lies in forgiving, rebuilding, and seeking peace even after the greatest storms. May this story inspire everyone to cultivate love and justice in their hearts, avoiding the paths of conflict and division. Did this story touch your heart, making you reflect on love, pride, forgiveness, and life's difficult choices. Then I invite you to leave a like below. Like this video so more people can learn about this powerful lesson that spans generations. And don't forget, share in the comments what you learned from Absalom's story, or perhaps an experience of forgiveness or family conflict that transformed your life. Your story can inspire many others. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. See you in the next video with more biblical stories that teach us how to live better. May God bless you and your family.